Thank you very much, Kamala, and it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Peter, for including me in this event as well. I hope today that I can impart a few trends that in my position of Nexus that we've seen amongst the next generation of wealth, and in particular, how we can use that understanding from those trends to capture the opportunity that comes with such privilege of wealth to drive lasting environmental and social impact in the Caribbean and beyond. It's a pleasure to speak with you all here today, especially as we're at kind of this great pivotal moment in history. Over the past generation and a half, we've harnessed the power of science to extend our lifespans by almost a decade globally, while at the same time we've hastened our planetary demise by accelerating runaway carbon emissions. We've pulled more people out of poverty worldwide than ever before, while at the same time, in the West, we weakened key tenets of our civil society and our social safety nets that we sort of fought so hard to instill during the 20th century. We've flattened the world. We've become connected and economically interdependent on a global scale that was hardly imaginable for my parents' generation. While at the same time, recently, we've become over-reliant on a few bad state actors across the globe that threaten the very economic systems and that prop up authoritarian regimes that we're now sadly all reliant upon. So for the past 70 years, we've prioritized and excelled at economic development and global growth. That promise of such policies were sold to us as a utopian vision of a world with less disease, less conflict, and more equality. And in many senses, those policies have led to incredible riches and some shared prosperity. And yet here we are today, still struggling to emerge from a global pandemic, grappling with Western democracies under threat, facing down the barrel of the climate emergency, and engaged in another sort of great struggle with tanks rolling through the fields of Europe. So as we look ahead and think about our generation, how will this generation, my generation, chart our own course? How will we build on the successes of those before us? And how will we rise to meet new and sometimes sadly familiar global challenges? I get asked this question often, given my position and my proximity to many of the leading voices of our generation. I help run NEXUS. So we're a global community of next-gen philanthropists, impact investors, and social innovators from some of the world's most influential business families. And our goal is to inspire, to educate, and to activate our community of members with these incredible resources, with this incredible access, and with this influence to amplify our collective impact, and as we like to say, hurry history. As we talked about, and I've heard in previous sessions, next generation's wealth has been presented with an incredible opportunity to deliver impact and solve some of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. Not only are next gens the first digitally native generation that has game-changing sort of exponential technology at our fingertips, we're also on the receiving end of the largest transfer of wealth in human history. Trillions of dollars will pass to our generation in the coming decade, and we must decide how we can ensure that it is leveraged responsibly, justly, and in a way that doesn't just protect wealth, but generates social and environmental returns alongside financial ones. To sort of understand how we can mobilize our generation, we first need to understand sort of key differences as to how our generation sees the world. For the past 20 years, and up until this recent conflict in Russia, our generation grew up in a period of general relative calm and free of major world dominating wars, as well as a decade plus of global prosperity. We've now connected to friends and communities around the world. We're now connected to friends and communities around the world, with the only real barrier being time zones and not borders. We've traveled more often and found ourselves having as much in common with someone in Kingston and Cairo or Hong Kong as sometimes we do in our own countries. If you visit a capital city, you'll see the same brands, you'll find the same foods, and you'll hear the same music. We see ourselves as global citizens, and we care about global causes and issues, and feel an affinity for foreign cultures like never before. That has led to the smashing of barriers and understanding that the preservation of the Amazon, the costs of glacier melts in Antarctica, and the protection of marine ecosystems throughout the world and throughout the Caribbean affect us all. We did a poll at Nexus, our last summit before the pandemic, and the majority of people, 70% of our members, listed a cause outside the US as their number one priority. And that's because travel is no longer a luxury, right? We can, with social media, the wonders of the world and the crystal clear waters of the Bahamas, or the cultural wonders of Trinidad's Carnival are no longer a world away. Many of us have the opportunity to visit them, and if not, we can experience them through our screens. The sense of global community and travel freedom, coupled with economic freedom, is changing expectations in how next gens see the world and do business. Certainly, it's been accelerated by the pandemic, but this kind of idea of digital nomadism is a trend that's here to stay. With our lives and work online, with families forming later in life, our generation in their 20s and early 30s can work pretty much anywhere in the world. I'm here in the UK with my fiance, and both of us are working for American organizations abroad. Fintech platforms have also sort of reduced the friction and the cost of living and doing business remotely, which means that governments must change too. Taxation laws must change. How laws must change. How we think about what it means to be a citizen also must change. Our philanthropy is changing too. The models of our parents, where at best philanthropy was pursued as a commitment upon retirement, and sometimes in its more cynical was a tool to rehabilitate one's legacy, is no longer a pursuit just for those entering their latter years, but it's rather a commitment integrated into our day-to-day lives. Inheriting trillions of dollars in collective net worth and the ability for entrepreneurs to become tech millionaires overnight means that philanthropy is more an identity than a legacy started and carried out in our 20s and 30s. Underlying that, it's a sense of urgency for our generation. We are facing an existential threat, not just to our own lives, but the future of humanity. Climate, even a decade ago, seemed sort of a far off concept or threat. Now we're seeing wildfires rip through Australia, American West, Greece, Turkey. We're seeing coastal cities under threat from rising sea levels and mega storms. And we're seeing food supplies and even our lives in our own communities disrupted by the unpredictable weather patterns and the 100-year storms that occur every 3 years. Our next generation is scared by this threat. We're seeing it in the data with married couples having less children than ever before. We're seeing it when they cite the risk of raising a child, the risks of raising a child in a climate uncertain world. We're seeing that from a defense standpoint. The U.S. military has argued that water scarcity from prolonged drought could be one of the greatest threats to geopolitical stability. And we're seeing it in California, the world's 5th largest economy, where many, including many of our members, are questioning the future of California given the threat of wildfires. Fortunately, that sort of underlying fear is also spurring action. The climate crisis is spurring action and driving more money into impact investing than ever before. The rate of impact investing, the percentage of money kind of pooled into that quote unquote impact investing sort of sphere, is doubling in almost every 3 years. I know from my experience, my work in supporting many in the NEXUS community, that there's a real sense that traditional philanthropy is not enough, that our ability to reach net zero will largely depend on 2 factors: technological innovation and a concerted and collaborative effort between government policy and businesses and the family office world. Family foundation, family offices are more and more getting involved in impact investing. We see it in the NEXUS community with impact funds popping up almost on a monthly basis. And traditional philanthropists, investors, and inheritors who are not just committing money to impact, they're also launching their own startups. Our role at NEXUS is to foster and accelerate that commitment. This rush to be part of the solution is hugely exciting, but also not without risk. And now more than ever, trust, connection, and community are sort of key tenets that people look for as they look to deploy capital to launch businesses and to enter new markets. Like any new trend or gold rush, there are always those looking to profit off that sort of euphoria and frothiness. So today, greenwashing is a real threat, and so too is the lack of understanding the fundamentals that kind of underpin the impact investing movement, as is a lack of will and intransigence from business, politicians, and leaders unable or unwilling to rise to meet the moment. Innovation only works and truly succeeds when it's encouraged, nurtured, and fed. And that is why the trusted community is so important. At Nexus, we've worked with heads of state and governments to build up those ecosystems and help sort of innovation flourish, to attract more capital, and not just more capital, but the right capital. We've worked with our partners to help them understand that net zero is not just a moral imperative, it's also a multi-trillion-dollar industry. To meet our net zero goals, more money will need to be poured into climate and green technology in the next 10 years than all the money that has gone into the development of the internet economy to date. Think about that. We need to spend more money in the next 10 years on green technology than we have in the last 30 years on the internet technology, or on the internet, I should say. Governments must do more. Governments must understand that our generation is sitting on enormous resources and potential, and that it is keen to get involved in this historic challenge, but that is also not driven by the same incentives of our parents. A good friend of mine and a fellow Nexus member summed it up best. In the 50s, his family purchased large land rights in the Grand Bahama. His grandfather set about developing Grand Bahama as an economic hub, driven primarily by the idea of attracting offshore businesses with low corporate and personal taxes. In stepping up to leadership within the family business structure, he has gone about building what he's calling the Blue Action Lab, a community of leading entrepreneurs and investors in the blue economy. Because as he puts it, we don't need another Hong Kong on this island. We need to save the island itself. The recent investment trends from our Nexus families, which represent about 1 trillion in collective net assets, if they're any indication, the communities and places that will thrive will be the ones that attract the innovators and the funders on the cutting edge who seek not to take from nature, but to save it, who aren't trying to escape cities, but to find more like-minded communities who can find and those who can find governments and institutions that seek to build businesses and ecosystems that are built on the premise that people, planet, and profit are inextricably linked. New models and great entrepreneurs that are found, new models and entrepreneurs are everywhere to be found. One of our Nexus Impact Accelerator Fellows is the founder of Coral Vita, a coral restoration startup that can grow coral 50 times faster in the ocean than it can reproduce in the sea. They just won the David Attenborough and Prince William Earthshot Prize for their work. They're not only growing millions of corals to hopefully save the Bahamian atolls, they're also proving that a model that protects nature can attract more tourism that's returning their investments in spades. There's another Nexus Impact Accelerator company called Lollyware, which is the first to sort of have cracked the code on plastic by replicating plastic microbeads with sustainably harvested seaweed alternatives. Starting with straws, they're nearing the ability to replace other plastics, including eventually cups, lids, bags, proving that, again, natural regenerative materials can not only be better for the planet, but can be an economic driver as well. They're working with coastal communities in Iceland, on the West Coast in Oregon, to develop regenerative supply chains that are not just serving their business, but are serving local communities in a kind of sustainable way. In the Caribbean, there's a company called Carbon Wave, which has an emerging technology that is able to extract alginate from sargassum, the harmful algae blooms that are choking Caribbean beaches, and again, proving that a nature-based solution can scale in the Caribbean region. By harvesting the sargassum from beaches, they're not only clearing beaches and for communities that are heavily dependent on tourism, they're also securing a carbon credit as the sargassum left on beaches rots, emitting harmful methane. Again, it's this idea that, going back to this idea that businesses can start anywhere, that there's opportunity all over the world and that entrepreneurs and capital are following it. Lastly, there's another company, Project Vesta, looking to engage the Caribbean market and is focused on carbon. They've discovered that you take a naturally occurring plentiful mineral called olivine and you pulverize it, turning it into dust, sprinkling it into the ocean. It not only pulls tons of carbon out of the atmosphere and into the ocean, and it stores it, but it also has been proven to lower the pH levels of the surrounding oceans that help prevent coral erosion. These are just a few examples of the kind of the many entrepreneurs that see the Caribbean as a place of business, as a place to invest in, as a place to grow, and as a place to protect. Hundreds of other entrepreneurs and investors dedicated to the blue economy are developing funding and backing solutions that are Caribbean focused as well. All of this sort of shows that the great wealth transfer is upending traditional systems. Family offices are no longer looking to step in with step up with philanthropy where governments may fall short. Family offices are instead looking to governments to collaborate, to invest side by side, and to help foster that next wave of great entrepreneurs and wealth holders who will rise to meet some of these great challenges of our time. So with that, I hope that gave sort of a broad overview of how the next gen philanthropists are really thinking about their role and how it's a transition from just typical philanthropy towards impact, towards innovation, and towards creating new values, new models of not only innovation, but wealth and protecting nature and protecting our ecosystems at the same time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. That was really a great opening for us because it shows so many different avenues by which there are opportunities for us in the Caribbean to be able to engage. So I would now like to ask our panelists if they would share a few thoughts. I would like to start with Loranzo and ask Loranzo, as a young man in the Caribbean region, what are some of his thoughts and his perspectives, both on what he would have heard from David just now or some new ideas of his own, which he may wish to share. Loranzo? Yes.
Hi, thank you. Yes, well, before I mention my ideas, I just have a question concerning the philanthropy that you mentioned before. Now, according to basically from what you're speaking about, you start off doing philanthropy, and eventually it goes into a business, and we more or less look into, let me say, protect the environment, the people, the planet, and things. But the bottom line is this: what prevents somebody from becoming a philanthropy in terms of looking after the people and the planet and even making a profit as well? What prevents that from making it all about money? For example, you have innovative ideas, you create these ideas, you open a business based on these ideas. But what stops this individual or this company from allowing this venture to turn into more profit than anything else?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we think a lot about. And I think you're very right to point out that, it can start out with great purposes to fill a need, and then it becomes about growing a business, and it becomes less about the impact and more about the about just revenue and profit. What I think that so first of all, there's still a huge amount of a huge role for just philanthropy in general. But what I think that we've also seen are new models of social business, so that have really exploded in popularity. So there are two that have come to mind, and one is there's a new corporation type model called the B Corp, which is very, very much like a traditional sort of standard C Corp or standard sort of legal entity, but it has the social aspect written into the business. So it has the social, environmental kind of governance structured in that can't be replaced. So for example, a company starts off as a B Corp, they have an mission to save, to protect corals, and then they get purchased by a larger corporation. The corporation can, in the past could strip out all the environmental or all the social goals of that business. By creating a B Corp, you prevent that. So if the company is purchased, their original mission must be honored and respected and remain, even if it's like a larger conglomerate that buys them. The second, idea that's gained a lot of popularity recently is a venture model, but it's a philanthropic venture model where, and this is more on the fund side, but companies are family foundations, family offices are setting up structures which, like a traditional funding a fund, but they put all their returns back into supporting other companies. And so that they're not looking to just take a profit. If a company has an exit or does well, that money goes back into the pool of capital to reinvest. So it's sort of venture philanthropy. But it is, but to your question, that it is a concern. It is a worry. The hope is that kind of our generation understands some of these challenges and wants to do the right thing. But I think we need more governance. I think we need more oversight. And I think, we as consumers also have to hold businesses to account, right? That when they make the pledges, that we actually put pressure on them to do that, because that is something that, unfortunately is happening, where companies might start with a social mission, but end up just turning into sort of profit-driven corporations.
All right, and question, next, but more or less from my Trinidadian perspective here. Now, in our case, we'd probably have a lot of plastics available. Let me say plastic waste. Yeah, there are some companies that would collect the plastic, but generally speaking, there will be a lot of waste all over, and it's not so much like a business perspective down here, more or less. So if someone says, okay, they want to start up to, start to clean and collect all these plastics and probably do something to clean up the island, clean up the land or so, then obviously they will need some level of capital or financing somewhere if they can't afford to do a massive job. They probably started off small, but if they're willing to go forward, they basically more or less depending on volunteers, or if they probably try to the government may sponsor also. Now, for somebody that is probably looking at that idea to start something like that, what would you advise? For example, you want to start up, it don't necessarily have to be the plastics, it could be anything in cleaning up the environment also. What type of advice you would give to somebody more or less now looking to venture into that kind of avenue?
Yeah. So when you think of on the plastic front, it's a mindset of understanding now that and more and more that there is opportunity at a lot of different levels, that looking at resources in a new way, looking to sort of harness, take something that's trash and turn it into, or waste and turn it into something that has a utility. So there's a company in Florida that set about collecting as volunteers, collecting a lot of the same problem, right? Collecting all the plastic bottles, all the plastic bits, all the trash from the beaches. And they actually turned it and they were able to start selling really small at the beginning, but selling sort of bracelets and selling and taking the plastics and making them in bracelets and using the strings like sort of, you can see it here, but like this, turning, making even just the strings out of the plastic waste. And they've grown it into a whole line and range of clothing, because it turns out that plastic has the same sort of chemical composition as polyester, right? And so they are able to take it, collect it, partner with a group and turn it into sort of both kind of, smaller gift items like this, but also t-shirts, also board shorts and whatever. And they've grown to be this
Okay.
now quite a large company. And so it's finding opportunity in sort of some of these these challenges, right? These environmental challenges. So whether it's plastics, or whether it's the example I brought up of Carbon Wave, which is collecting kind of harmful sargassum off the beaches, right? Like these resorts are really paying them to get rid of the sargassum. And so they take it and they extract the alginate. So there's a lot of different models now that we can sort of utilize to find ways to create social businesses that actually have an underlying effect in supporting the local community. I mean, even like the one with the sargassum Carbon Wave, they pay people in the community to go out and collect these tons and tons of sargassum. So they're cleaning the beach in the process, which is helping support tourism, because a lot of times these beaches, people stop coming because they're covered in this harmful seaweed.
All right. And based on the great introduction, the bio that Ms. Kamla mentioned about you before you came on, knowing that you would probably have a wealth of experience. I think. Question: what is like a personal question to you? What was one of the most challenging things that you probably would have encountered on your journey now in terms of philanthropy to where you are now?
The hardest thing I've encountered. That's a good question. I think what we work on every day is there's so many is when we work with our community, is finding ways to engage our members who have incredible amounts of resources, right? Just philanthropists in general have incredible amounts of resources to sort of do more. Because there's so many challenges to solve and so many issues that that affect us all, right? And we also only have bandwidth to care about so much, right? We can only care about it's just natural that we each have 3 or 4 main passions. It doesn't mean that we don't really care about all the other things that are happening, but we can only sort of work on so many issues at one time. But I think it's to work with philanthropists and impact investors to do more, to engage more of their resources, to engage more of their access and their influence. And the way we try to do that is to create sort of on-ramps for people to get involved. Sometimes they can't get involved fully, but they can make the right introduction. They can make that critical. They can write a check that really gets everything started. You don't always have to it's not just money. It's also not just time. It's also thinking about sort of the other kind of all the different resources we each have and utilizing those. And I think that's oftentimes like a big hurdle, is people want to find ways to get involved in an issue, but they don't know where to start, who to work with, how to quite go about it. So it's finding the ways to build sort of frameworks and systems and on-ramps so that it's easier for a philanthropist to part with their money, knowing that it's going to go to a good cause or good place with really strong impact. That we create ways where it's easier for them to get involved, they care about, even if they can't dedicate fully towards that issue. So I think that's one of the most challenging aspects day to day of our work. Which is finding, partners on the ground, finding, the real sort of most sophisticated, whether it's startups, whether it's charities that really have a really solid framework that we can engage with.
Thank you very much, David. I would like to bring Azam in on the conversation now. So Azam is joining us. He is at work in Guyana at the moment. Azam, would you like to start with some remarks of your own, or are you going to ask a question as well?
Yes, actually, his last point is leading up to what I wanted to speak about. He mentioned in his speech about about protecting the nature and ecosystem. And this is something that is affecting everyone, it's a global concern. And also he mentioned, companies moving towards net zero. And net zero is something that is a challenge to achieve. Because, for example, when you look at those annual reports from big companies such as Nestle and Burberry, and you see what they're doing, you recognize that there's a lot of finances, resources, especially human resources, research and development and technology that will be needed to meet net zero, and they have these long timelines. You also mentioned that the world has become more flat and we're more connected, and there's need for more community. And also the models that we're using. There's the microforces cluster model has been out there, for some time now. It's existing in the literature and the research. And what that basically is the geographical concentrations of interconnected companies. And it has a lot of its dimensions speak to what you have spoken about earlier, including it plus the policies, openness. How do the clusters help with specialization and organization, and as well as collective efficiency? So what I'm leading up to is, do you think philanthropy can work with these clusters to help with progressing these huge tasks, these gargantuan tasks such as protecting nature ecosystems and meeting net zero? And should there be more clusters out there and more focus on cluster development? Yeah, so I was asking if do you think philanthropy would be able to work with such cluster development to achieve these gargantuan tasks of meeting net zero and helping companies meet net zero, and the other initiatives of protecting nature and the ecosystem? And should there be more focus on developing such clusters within industries, to help us as a global community move towards better success in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think philanthropy is hugely important, and a lot of times, I think that philanthropy can be the catalyst for launching new projects, new micro businesses, even creating ecosystems that can then help attract larger capital, or can help lead to the formation of a business, right? I think that especially globally, but I think philanthropy has a really critical role in preserving, well, when you look at like net zero or on the environmental side, sort of really like in conservation, I think it's incredibly critical. And I think this can be sort of the seed that, well, first of all, I can think it stands on its own as well, but it can also be the kind of the seed funding, or the base to help communities that sort of begin to build new systems, frameworks, begin to bring people together to collaborate, begin to serve as the catalyst for change. So yeah, I think philanthropy is incredibly important. And what I don't want, I don't want it to seem like that everyone is just rushing into starting, to investing, impact investing, or starting their own businesses. I think there are still philanthropists that are doing incredible and great work. But what I think that a lot of philanthropists are understanding and realizing is that that we need models that can sustain themselves. We need models of conservation, of innovation, that can sustain themselves and continue on without philanthropic capital. And so I think the idea is around philanthropy in our generation has changed to say, okay, can philanthropy be the catalyst for the ecosystems, for building ecosystems, as opposed to that can then live on their own, as opposed to sort of serving as like holding up a community, or being like sort of where communities are dependent, or individuals or the work is dependent on philanthropic capital. So it's a shift from sort of you're giving philanthropy every year to ensure that this project or this group, you know, stays afloat, to creating ways for philanthropy to sort of kickstart ideas and innovation that can then go on and become social businesses, or then go on and take on a life of their own without it, and can live without it. I think that is how I see philanthropy changing, how our members have been talking about how they're thinking about their own philanthropy, and how it's developing and evolving. But yes, I think philanthropy is incredibly important, and especially in sort of the efforts around conservation, and the efforts around creating sort of the foundations for communities to find a way to tackle net zero collectively. I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope it did.
Yes, there's just one part of the question. Do you think it can work with you know, these other developmental organizations, other communities of organizations, such as company clusters that would exist in the different parts of the world?
Okay, and while David thinks through that question, I want to ask Peter to join the conversation as well, because I know that this is an area that he has a lot of passion and focus. So Peter, let me just invite you to the floor as well, and engage with David and our two panelists.
Brilliant. Yes, David, I really got two questions. One's more of a family office question, and the other's more of an institutional government question. So starting off with sort of the ultra high net worth family office world, let's just say, I'll make it really easy. Let's just say you've had a major patriarch, they've just passed, and they've left three of their next gens equal amounts. They've given each of one of them 100 million each for their own foundation. Person one, okay, decides to totally direct those funds towards philanthropy. And let's assume they've got sound governance and principles there. But number two decides to consider, okay, I'm going to invest 80% of this money into impact investments, and of course, dedicate maybe 20% of that 100 million to philanthropy, but I'm going to reinvest a portion of those returns from the 80% in impact and ESG investments into the philanthropic needs. And then there's the third one, which let's assume you're the benefactor. So there's one mousetrap, there's a second mousetrap. What are your thoughts on those two? And do you have a better idea? Because the big concern I'm thinking is, of course, we both know that the catalysts are these next gens, because they're passionate, they believe in it, it's part of their spirit, it gives them depth and meaning in their life, and they want to make a difference. But sometimes just giving it away is not always the answer. There's also the impact investment component, which can be used really as a great mechanism. So I'd just love to know if there's any situation 1, 2, or maybe even a better third model exist, and your thoughts on how this could evolve from sort of philanthropy and impact. That's question one.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, and Azam, I'll think about your question and come back to it. But to answer your question, Peter, yeah, I think that what we're seeing more and more of is this hybrid approach, right? We're seeing you get $100 million, you take 20 or 30 million, you put into traditional philanthropy, you take 20 million and put into some sort of venture philanthropic model that has reinvests any returns back into companies that into sort of these hybrid social businesses. And I think there is an increasing need for this, and not just need, but trend of ultra high net worth individuals investing in impact. And I think what we need, what needs to happen in those instances is, if that was truly sort of a traditional philanthropic bucket, what needs to happen is we need to take bigger collective risks. We need to like back moonshot projects. We need to be the first check. We need to, when no one else wants to invest because it's too risky, we need to really push the envelope in terms of the companies that we're investing in that are at the forefront of major technological advances that can kind of leapfrog traditional industry. Because if that money would be traditionally in philanthropy, then collect, we need to Lorenzo's point, right, that it can't just be investing in companies that are going to have a profit and return, and then you get kind of sucked into this idea of wanting to sort of continue to make money, can continue to grow that and not take the sort of risks that are necessary. It's 100% okay to take major, or to make returns, but if you have that ability, if you have that fortune to have that those kind of resources, you need to take those big risks. And I think that's what we try to do and encourage. We try to encourage people to say, okay, this is not money that you need to live off of. This is not money that you need to necessarily grow. This is money that wasn't, in the past and older generations was just purely philanthropic. You can have a return, but you need to take the big risks to really help push the boundaries, move the needles, and get us to where we need to go in terms of achieving some of these major goals that we collectively need to achieve. Net zero, thinking about investing in new materials and reducing plastic and other types of waste, providing sort of new kind of economic models to uplift communities that are sort of underrepresented or have been struggling to attract capital. So I think that's the mindset that I sort of try to advise our members on.
No, indeed, and that perfectly feeds into my next question, because you talk about the big risk, and the families and the next gens, etc., are often the ones that write that 100,000, 500,000, maybe 1, 2, 5, and in the bigger families, very rarely sort of the 20, 50, $100 million checks. But really, they are taking that initial risk to develop that concept or that movement, or even if in the case if it's an impact or ESG investment. Big mission, sort of and a real passion of mine was I know it's in very safe hands, and with your stewards and thought leaders such as yourself, Rachel, David Herman, Jonah, and others that are really moving the family offices, and they don't really need to be convinced. It's just maybe a better way or how, because they want to know how can we do it more effectively. But at the institutional and government level, it's really about the support that people like you in the NEXUS community really need. I mean, my first part of the question is number one, what do you think governments and institutions can do to better support these initial risk-taking, early-stage philanthropists and impact investments? That's point one. And number two, I'm looking at this as, look, Professor Garrett and I have discussed the concept of economic returns plus entrepreneurship plus ESG to get sort of the bigger institutional money. Because when you're looking at impact investment, there's maybe that 1-2% that they're willing to sort of give away. They don't care if they lose. But if we could really sort of rock the world in a major way to get funds from, say, private equity, venture capital, and these other areas, and look at this as how can we build the alternative investment category of impact and ESG. So there are returns there, and serious institutions decide to sign the big checks. Yep, we're going to give that 200 million to this impact investment over a conventional for-profit investment, where I believe if we take the right approach, in 10 to 15 years, we could, and my dream is to see 5 trillion in debt and bonds and 5 trillion in equities and capital into this new category of, let's call it, profit-driven impact. I mean, what are your thoughts on that and where it could go? So part one is, of course, the support from governments and institutions. And number two, the alternative investment sort of world where we could go with impact at a larger level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so interesting. So I moved here to the UK just a couple months ago, and I had an opportunity to go to 10 Downing Street and meet with Boris, the speechwriter, and we had an opportunity to talk about. They kind of invite us in because they are looking to become sort of the hub for certainly Europe, if not globally, sort of the conscious capitalism, or the race, kind of the hub for entrepreneurship and investors looking to participate in the green economy. And what was interesting is, is they kind of the person I met, the individual I met with, was saying that the UK has all the capital, but they need the right capital. They need to attract the conscious capital. They need to bring in the investors who are really looking to work with the government to not only make it the kind of the global hub and innovation, but also are working to solve big solutions that then the UK and other governments can sort of adopt and employ. And I thought that was interesting that they sort of recognize that, but that also it wasn't just you just can't flip a switch as a government and say, great, we want all the conscious capital, to come from all the world to come here. You actually have to really do the work to build out the ecosystem. You have to create the tax structures and the governance that attracts the entrepreneurs. You have to create incentives to invest for, the sort of the impact investors to come, right? Like you have to create sort of incentives if you're investing in ESG. You have to create incentives if you are an entrepreneur, that you have a social business, right? You have to build out an entire sort of ecosystem that goes far beyond just here are a few projects that you can invest in as an impact investor. And I think that takes a lot of foresight, because it is your kind of policies are different when you're attracting sort of this conscious capitalism than you're attracting different investors, right? It's a much longer time horizon. You need much more of a focus on social and environmental goals, right? You need that much more of that community. You need to bring in, you need to provide for the entrepreneurs who are typically earlier stage, who typically are have a bit higher risk profile, who have more needs. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. But when you set it up, you will get people to come, and that leads to the second point, which is we had this next member who's comes from family office in the Bahamas, and like I mentioned in my talk, they're based in the Grand Bahama, and they are creating what they call the Blue Action Lab, and it's for kind of entrepreneurs and investors committed to investing in ocean solutions. And they have created a kind of a land lease program where you get, if you commit to this, you commit to coming down to the Grand Bahama, if you commit to basing your business there, you get sort of 5 years free, land leases, you get tax incentives, you get there's a whole community of other entrepreneurs and investors that are now moving there that you get to be a part of. You get sort of the platform that they are creating, and you have a kind of opportunity to test and pilot and build your technology there, right? So they're also not just bringing in or trying to attract the blue economy entrepreneurs, but they also everything that goes along with that, the micro manufacturing, the other resources that enable those entrepreneurs to be successful. So I think that is that, and we're seeing that in other places around the world. But those types of models where they're really community focused, community oriented, they're really created for the entrepreneur. And in doing so, they also create the right sort of ecosystem for investors to feel comfortable too, because even though these are sort of startups and riskier investments, there is a sense that there's a kind of a de-risking element, because you're bringing them all together. You're kind of collectively working towards the same challenges, and you're bringing a whole bunch of resources to one place to sort of create that sort of ecosystem to support the companies and also the big ideas, and also the investors as well.
So if I may join in for a second, to say it sounds a little bit as though, how do we decide which comes first, because David is talking about there need to be that whole ecosystem that provides the incentives to be able to attract the investment. So I want to ask Loranzo, if, and this is a question I'm really taking from Peter, so I'm cheating him a little bit, because he has this great idea that he normally puts on the floor. So I'm going to ask Lorenzo, if we were to try to start up that ecosystem by saying, Lorenzo, if we were to give you $100 million, as a young person, when you look around you, what for you will be the kind of concerns that you would want to see addressed, that will really garner the passion of other young persons so that we can put that kind of ecosystem in place that will attract further investment. So you have $100 million, Lorenzo. What are maybe some of the things you would want to see that trying to solve?
Well, I was sitting here and I was actually thinking about something at the moment, so it had two things that I was currently thinking about. One was really the environment. One is really the environment, and two is actually youths, like younger individuals, because there are some issues that probably that is plaguing a lot of the youths in terms of support, providing a support system for youths. Sometimes we have a lot of youths, but we have no support for them. They may be going to school, but there's no support after school. On a weekend, there's nothing to do. Maybe their parents busy and they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they don't have time to spend with them. I think it's more like a mentorship program for youths, whether it be from a very young age until they reach their 20s or even older. Mentorship program for youth, to help them, to mold their minds into becoming better individuals. Open up their understanding to different opportunities that may be available. Because sometimes as young persons growing up, there are a lot of opportunities out there, but they are not privy to it because there's no information about it. People would say, okay, there are a lot of things there, the youths could do a lot of things, but nobody is guiding them and showing them what to do. Yes, there are those that have the guidance, and thank God for that, but there are lots of them that doesn't have the guidance, and my thing is more or less guiding the youths and providing that support for them. So this is something that I personally am passionate about. So definitely.
I can tell you I love that idea too, Lorenzo. And if I did have 100 million, I would want to invest in a program like that, because I totally agree. Young persons do have a lot of concerns. The internet allows them to be able to see and learn about different kinds of things that happen in the world. But it's important that we help put the kinds of systems in place to grow their mindset, to allow them to feel a sense of confidence that they themselves can have positive impact on the world because of the energy that they can bring to the table as well. So that's definitely one. Azam, I know that you are at work, but I want to ask you, what would you say maybe something that can be invested in Guyana? If you were given 100 million, would you be able to share with us how you think that may best be used?
Hello, yes, I took over the mask. I hope you can hear me better now.
Yes.
So yes, definitely I would put it towards, and if I can extend your question towards the Latin American region, one of the things that's suffering in this region is the technological development, right? And the challenge is the appropriation of technology in the Latin America, because technology has a lot of benefits that can solve many of the problems that we're facing. But there are a lot of challenges that prevent us from adopting technology, including we're producing in terms of human resource development, we have a lower rate of producing persons or professionals within the science field at the master's level and at the doctorate level. So, getting more persons to come out into that field to incorporate the science and human resource capacities we need to help manage technology. That is one. And also looking at the infrastructure. Our internet penetration rate is lower in the Latin American region as compared to the rest of the world. And if we can improve that, it will help with the adoption of even simpler technologies that are available out there for us to be able to progress further. And so, I would help, and it will help invest. And once we have those platforms, even in medicine, because one of the challenges of person not investing in the long term is that we're unable to provide a high level of medicine to support human resources that will come into the country or even the region. So, overcoming those little things will help create a platform that can help us to move forward and take on even the bigger stuff, such as net zero and protecting the natural environment.
And if I may follow up with one question to you, Azam, in terms of, you are in Guyana where there is this major shift taking place as a result of the new wealth that's coming into the country. What do you think may be some of the concerns for the younger population in Guyana? What needs to be addressed to help them be ready to manage these resources in such a way that they're not following the footsteps and committing some of the mistakes of previous generations in other countries?
One particularly is the education and, getting the right education to our people and allowing them to develop their expertise. Because COVID-19 came along and it really affected schools and, students were struggling in schools, and hopefully as we move forward, that can continue so that they can move on to the tertiary level to get the expert knowledge they need to help with that. And also for the younger generation is overcoming the bureaucracies that we face at a political level, even as a people and the unity of our people, and overcoming bureaucracies and differences and driving and challenging the political system to not look at the biases that they have and overcoming those biases, and how can we work together, towards one goal, and that is maximizing or optimizing the resources that we have and attaining the levels of attaining the capacities we need to do so.
Mm-hmm. Sounds really good. David, may I ask, are there similar type programs that exist, at NEXUS that would address, because here we are hearing, while there is concern for environment and climate change and all that, what is needed in the region is more an investment in human capital to build the young people, to build their confidence and their ability to be able to make use of a lot of what exists to then address some of those problems. Can you share with us what may be some examples if there are things like that happening at NEXUS?
Yeah, so I will give an example that I like and I think is quite a powerful example. Then I'll talk a little bit about NEXUS, but an example of how to create sort of a powerful ecosystem. About 20 years ago, after the fall of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, the Estonian government sort of recognized an opportunity in the technology space, and they invested a lot of capital, of time and money and resources into building up a developer base. And the two Swedish entrepreneurs came along with an idea to create a company, Skype, and they were looking for where to base it. And they were looking to base it in Sweden, and they were frustrated by Sweden had higher taxes and higher regulation, stronger and stricter regulation. But what actually convinced them to move to Estonia was the fact that Estonia had a stronger, more robust developer pool. They had created they had a stronger pool of human capital. And so they went to Estonia and ended up building Skype. And what happened was, in creating Skype, not only did they become very wealthy, but a lot of the developers and the earliest kind of entrepreneurs, they also made a lot of money. But more than that, they learned all the skills, and they developed and learned about the kind of startups and how to build a company. And then when it IPO'd, many of them went off and launched their own companies. And now today you look at Estonia, and it's one of the leading sort of technological ecosystems, not only in Eastern Europe, but even globally, right? And you have you have TransferWise and Bolt and all these companies that have come out of Estonia, a tiny country, right? With landlocked country with very few sort of natural resources, but a country that sort of harnessed the power of human capital and invested in creating sort of a leading generation of web developers. That was then furthered on by the success of one company that helped build an entire ecosystem. So I think I like that, and I think about that model and how you can replicate that model in other fields. But yes, human capital is ultimately what will not only help sort of communities and cities, countries develop, it will also be the kind of the chief resources that helps us solve even environmental, challenges, right? And so, I think in terms of at Nexus, we support. I mean, the initiative that we've really supported in the Caribbean is this Blue, Action Lab in the Bahama, which is to attract entrepreneurs, to attract investors to Grand Bahama, to help them build out their ecosystem. But a lot of that also requires, like Azam said and you said, strong education, a pipeline from graduating from high school and graduating from college into the job market. And so, we look at ways, I think we sort of support our members to help them think about ways that they can not only just have an environmental solution, but one that has as well a social solution. So I look at Coral Vita, which is part of that. They are the ones planting corals, but they actually, their whole laboratory of all their tanks that are growing corals is open to communities, and they run tours and classes, and they run educational training so that they can teach the next generation, the young school children, why saving coral is important. What is the value in doing that? Then they have a whole nother program which teaches members of the community how to often many of them don't even know how to swim, but then how to swim and how to dive. So they can become sort of divers that hopefully will help them not only plant coral, but they can go off and become certified divers to do other, open a whole new world. So it's idea is creating sort of companies that have, yes, they might be solving a certain challenge, but they're much more well-rounded, and they're much more sort of open to solving or to uplifting all the different ESG, UN SDG categories, right? It's not just about one, it's about supporting the workforce. It's about education. It's about how do you connect those and others with the mission of, maybe it's an environmental mission or maybe it's a social mission. How do you tie them all in together to make a much stronger commitment to the local population? Because if you can engage and a whole kind of community, you will go much further in your core work. in achieving your goals of impact.
That's
I
absolutely
certainly
right.
agree.
Yeah. So ultimately it does look like also coming back to the notion of collaboration, where we share our resources, we share our expertise, and together be able to achieve that much more. And I really like the examples you have given, David. Definitely Estonia is a spectacular example of where a decision can be made that strategically looks at what is the kind of future that you'd like to build, and that example of Skype we can all relate to, because I think all of us possibly have a Skype account. So
we used to.
shows...
It's only Zoom now, but we used to.
And I actually still have Skype, so I can make phone calls at different times. But yes, definitely. So and it's also an example of how the technology is changing, and so more opportunities may be created all the time. If we look at what may be the gaps of what people need to be able to move forward. And I really like this example you've been telling us about the Blue Action Lab in Grand Bahama. Can you, what specifically is the purpose of Blue Action Lab?
Yeah.
Is it for ocean cleanup? Is it for...
Yeah, and before I answer that, I was just saying to Azam's point, I think that as we talked about earlier, like the role of philanthropy, right? It can be working with governments to build out to improve the education levels, to create sort of the training, the further training and the opportunity, so that then companies and organizations can then come and want to invest because they feel like there is a really strong human capital there, right? I think that is where philanthropy can have its greatest impact when you look at sort of development economics, or you look at these opportunities, these projects. It's the opportunity to come in and provide all, and the just lay the foundation for companies and organizations to build on top of. And that starts with education, that starts with developing human capital. To your question about the Blue Action Lab, the Blue Action Lab is set up to be a laboratory to test and build the world's most promising ocean solutions. So they are looking to recruit, and we're helping to recruit companies that are ocean based. They all have to have an impact. They all have to be focused on ESG, on the UN SDG goal around the oceans. They all have to have a strong underlying social commitment, but it's to attract the next generation of ocean technologies, whether that is carbon neutral shipping, whether that is nature-based solutions like this Coral Vita I mentioned, whether that is creating a hub for research scientists and research activity to support future understanding of the oceans or better understanding the ocean, whether that's to test a motorboat company that is electric, right, to come down there and to build their fleet and to practice and just to grow. It's supposed to be a laboratory to test big ideas and for companies to scale in a sort of a supportive, nurturing environment that has a tax-like jurisdiction, has sort of these land leases where they have a few years before they have to pay rent, so that they're able to sort of scale their businesses, and that without the pressure of all the expenses that come along with capital costs and rent and other capital costs. And then it's to attract investors to come down and support them. So it's not just for entrepreneurs, it's also for the whole community. And part of that is also, and very much of it is the local Bahamian community in this case, which is how do they, and I say we because I serve as advisor, but how do we engage the whole Bahamian community to create a new model for economic development, one that is and moves away from just a tourism-based economy towards the ability to become an entrepreneurial hub towards a little bit light manufacturing, towards conservation, and it's to diversify the Grand Bahamas, economic base.
Yeah, it sounds really awesome, because it clearly is so much more, agile than what I was thinking. I see Professor Garrett has unmuted, so I want to invite him if he has a comment or question that he wants to contribute to in this panel.
Thank you. A couple of points. One, David, from my bitter experience, the farthest you can get away from government, the better in what you're doing, because I think you're doing a very good job. And my experience of government in many, many countries is that a politician will commit, possibly at least verbally, for 1 or maximum 2 years, but as their time span is no more than 4 years, the chances of them actually really committing to support you and your ideas is not very long. And sadly, civil servants have the same sort of time span. So the chances of getting long-term commitment in those areas is not high. Therefore, I think Nexus needs to, deal with government, but at arm's length as much as it can. It's what I understand from what you said about Nexus is that it's a very interesting focus for people in 2 ways. One, and the one you've just been developing very clearly, is as a really good international ideas exchange. And that, I think, is needed more and more now, particularly given the strange times we're in. And so people are coming to you either with ideas or for ideas. And from the way you said it, it's to an extent for ideas on the one hand. And the other bit you do, but I think, again, it's more arm's length. And it's interesting to me is your up-ramp analogy, that you can then, without having to become an agency in the area, you can then direct people in to where they can get resource. That resource, from the point of view of your members, is not money by definition. It's not finance. It's actually suitable people. It's the human aspects of it to deal with that. And I think it's very interesting the way Nexus might develop as a very, very powerful non-governmental agency for doing rather remarkable things internationally, making this really is impact investment, but in a way, both financial and human aspect of the impact coming through together. I had in the back of my mind something that happened to me about 15 years ago in Barbados, when I was doing a piece of work for the Prince of Wales's Trust, and was wandering along a beach early one morning, which is most unusual for me. And there was a young guy, I mean, really young, most probably about 12 years old. And he was obviously very poor indeed. And I just asked him what he was doing. And he said, I've just had a brilliant idea. I've got nowhere to sleep. I've got no family. I've got no cash. And I sleep under the fishing boats at night. And this morning, when the fishing boats came in, they were taking off their catch and they were gutting the fish. And some of it fell on me. And I was really, really upset that I was covered in fish gut. And it was only when I thought about, well, what is this fish gut? You know, it's obviously horrible to me, but could I use it? And I was thinking about it, and I then began to think, hey, look, if I need some money, if I found a way of drying this rather than let it rot, it could possibly be quite a useful fertilizer. And if I began to go into the fertilizer business, even as a 12-year-old, I could most probably get a few people around here in the richer houses to buy it as useful for their garden. And that's what he did. And in the end, he became a very successful gardener. But it's interesting the way these very small things happen, which need very little funding necessarily, but need an idea. Sometimes they do need big funding, but your work as an idea exchange intrigues me, and I'm delighted that by chance we happen to be meeting later in the month, and I'd love to talk through with you, because I think that's part of it. Part of what's missing is not the access to money, because that is possible. It's the access to really useful ideas, which people get committed to, get excited by, and then can fund. So that was a statement rather than a question. Sorry, but
I absolutely, I mean, I thank you, and I agree with a lot of that. I think it's not just an exchange of ideas, but it's the building of shared ecosystems around shared purposes. Because the way I like to see it is, if you know, if I ever am going out and wanting to do something, right, I will very rarely will I go off and do something alone. If there are 2 or 3 other friends that are going and doing that, or very rarely will I go and invest in something or give to something. But if there's 2 or 3 others that I trust, that I see that are investing in this company, or that are, you know, getting involved in this cause, I am much more likely to, well, much likely to do it, but also just be more curious about it. And even though it's not right for me, I now be curious about that issue, that space, that company, you know, the types of company. So it's helping people. It's creating a community that helps people feel like they aren't alone, and feel like they have others that they can share experiences with, that they can build together with, that they feel like that can help nurture their passions, their ideas, and hopefully, you know, they're giving or they're investing.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, so we've had quite a bit of a wide-ranging discussion here, you know, in terms of possibilities and opportunities, with some excellent examples too of what has been done elsewhere. So we are getting close to the time for this panel discussion. I just want to ask Azam or Loranzo if either of them have a question, or if they have a closing comment which they'd like to make. Just let me know before I invite David to give us his closing remarks.
Hello. Yes, I'm really was happy to be part of this, and, you know, hearing about the initiatives that are taking place. You know, just sometimes just having the awareness is helps you, you know, it helps, gives you peace that things are happening. You know, we all have the concerns about our ecosystems in the future, and, you know, hearing that these philanthropy initiatives are out there, it brings peace to you. And my final point was the question I was asking David about, you know, cluster development and organizations coming together. So organizations that are similar and can have positive competition, coming together in regions, different specific geographical regions coming together. So, you know, move forward these initiatives. And definitely based on what he said, that philanthropy can help, you know, with cluster development and promoting cluster development. So it's something I was happy to be a part of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Azam. Loranzo?
Yes, you know, I just want to say, you know, thanks, thank you a lot for inviting me today. You know, I really you know, I really am happy that I was here. You know, David spoke a lot concerning concerning philanthropy, and I really want to I really appreciated all his contributions and everyone who contributed. So I just want to say my gratitude for being here today.
Sorry, thank you very much, Lorenzo. Okay, all right. Peter, did you by any chance have any last question or comment for David before we invite him to close this panel?
Not particularly, but I think we've really explored the purpose of these discussions from many levels. And you've probably seen, David, how it started off as just a presentation of friendly thought, but it's taken a life of its own and it's stimulated further discussion, further ideas. And the whole purpose of this is us to think, well, that's interesting. Maybe we should continue that discussion and look at collaborating. So it's not just about, and that's where I think a lot of these governmental and think tanks don't always move in the same way as, say, groups such as NEXUS were formed really from that spirit and that passion of bringing communities together, but then working together under the 3 C's, the collaboration, co-creation, and co-elevation of one another. So I really like the way this discussion has sort of evolved, where we've seen things from different perspectives. And now we've put that knowledge into that circle. Now I think let's, now that it's in that circle, we look at seeing how we can grow that in helping one another together. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Peter. So David, and thanking you, I want to invite you if you have any closing comments that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I would just say that I think that it's a really exciting time for the Caribbean, and especially just huge amounts of possibility and opportunity. So many, philanthropists and impact investors now are looking globally for to invest or to give, or as entrepreneurs to sort of start businesses, and we've become such a flat world, and people are moving about and looking for opportunity wherever it exists. And traditionally, I think the Caribbean people kind of looked at it as lacking maybe the resources of others, right? Maybe the natural resources elsewhere, but in truth, you have actually a unlimited amount of resources. In terms of that, you have the ability, you have the ocean right in front of you, all around you, right? You have a young populace that is could be, has a potential to develop into a really incredible human capital gift to the world. You have all sorts of, you have a great beaches and climate and an incredible way to track people down that can sort of end up starting businesses and build and investing and really creating meaningful impact and opportunity here in the Caribbean. So the opportunity is there, and I think that it really come down to inspiring people to join in some of the efforts that are already ongoing, and building ecosystems to encourage others to see what they're missing out on. But I'm just really grateful to be here, and thank you to Peter, and thank you, Kamala, for moderating, and to Azam and Lorenzo for your ideas and questions and this discussion, because as Peter, I think you said, it's the first step is the ideas exchange, but next comes a collaboration and how to really go beyond the discussion and build things that are meaningful.